My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas. David Cartland, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks for having me. It's good to join you.
I actually wanted to have you on my show quite some time back, and I can't quite remember exactly why it didn't happen, but I'm glad you are joining me now.
No, it's I've been in the trenches, to be honest, as you mentioned. So it's been I've been fighting for my career, fighting for my ability to work, fighting for quality of life, really. So I'm glad you've got me on eventually, and I'm sorry we've missed each other so many times.
Yeah, I use the trenches metaphor quite a lot. I mean, that's pretty much the underlying theme of my entire podcast. We are in a war.
Oh, without doubt, it's a weaponless war. It's a very clever war, and you've got to admire it really when you look at it's multifaceted as well, not just the COVID side of things, but it's very clever if you think about all the psychological techniques, the psyops, and the way it's been carried out. It's a genius, criminal genius. So yeah, we're definitely in a war. I agree.
You were a GP or are a GP, and you were struck off the medical register for refusing to harm patients. Take me through that.
Yeah, very interesting. It's as you mentioned, I don't consider myself a doctor anymore. I don't associate with that profession. I guess I am due to the degrees that I did. I did a degree in biomedical sciences, and I did a degree in medicine. So back-to-back degrees in science and medicine. So yeah, had a pretty quiet life. Moved down to Cornwall at the start of the scamdemic. Am I allowed to call it that, or I want to call it pandemic?
You can call it whatever you want. I just call it a hoax.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I noticed a lot of the hoaxes in real time. So as a doctor, you're seeing all these ridiculous anti-science rules, things that just didn't make sense. This killer disease that was so bad that one of the symptoms was no symptoms. Yeah, that's all you need to say. And then, you can go to a pub and you're protected from the virus if you have a meal in front of you, but not just a beer. If you have a beer, the virus will attack you, for example. So anyway, going back to my sorry tale of woe, exactly what you said, really. I was a GP. I had an exemplary career. It's an exemplary academic career as well. I always pride myself on the fact that I've not been a troublemaker. I've never been in trouble at school. Through my footballing career, and we'll talk about football as we go on because that's one of the consequences. Never really got into trouble with the refs, never really got yellow carded. So followed the rules, really, a good citizen, as it were. And then out of nowhere, I decided to speak out about what I saw in my own clinic room. This wasn't Dave Cartland's conspiracy theory. This was my clinic room in Penzance in a small surgery, and seeing not only the city rules and the PCR and the nonsense on the TV about the pandemic itself, but the golden calf, wasn't it? It was the golden calf, the vaccination. It was all about bringing in the jab into the arm, and saw it, in real time. They brought this big vat of vaccines in. I remember it really well, and they opened the big truck. And there was a round of applause by all the doctors and the nurses and the paramedics as these Moderna and Pfizer vaccines came out through out the back of this truck, and started going into arms quicker than grease lightning, really. And just seeing my patients literally dropping. It was. Some people were immediate. Some people were having issues after the vaccine on the same day. Some people were a couple of days later. Some people were a few weeks later. But it was. It was beyond all reasonable doubt. If you're sat in a clinic room and your patients are coming into you saying, "Doctor, I had the vaccine 2 days ago and I haven't stopped having chest pain since," and that keeps happening day in, day out, then you're going to start, paying attention to these red flags. And so I did. I even took the jab myself. That's the twist in the tale. I had 2 of the bioweapons myself under huge coercion. It was essentially a gun to the head. If you don't take it, you will be fired, Dr. Cartland. And that was part of my story, that I took the bioweapon. Now I call it a bioweapon because I don't see it as anything else. And yeah, the trouble started when I started to rear my head and say, look, I'm seeing vaccine injury. I kept a really simplistic approach. I looked at lockdowns and masks in detail. They don't work, and there's collateral damage associated with both. I looked at children. I looked at pregnant women. They were going down the ages very quickly, and in my experience, At the time, people who had COVID, in inverted commas, were old, obese, multiple comorbidities. Why are they giving it to 30-year-old men that are fit and healthy? And then they went even further and started to plan giving it to 5 to 12-year-olds. Absolutely appalling. And I remember chatting at the time to my colleagues, and they said, no, we're not going to give it to our children. We wouldn't give it to our children. There's no clinical indication. We'll never give a vaccine to a child under our roof. And yet the next day, they're down the jabatoire, as I call it, sending staff down to jab your children whilst refusing.
I love that term. Wait. Jabatoire. I've never heard anybody say that.
The jabatoire, exactly what it was. It was a jabatoire. It's literally, it was sheep herding. I've seen people literally herded like animals through the system on a big circuit around the building, and it's like pneumatic jabbing, no questions asked, no information exchanged, jab, 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 and then they came down the ages. So going back to my original 5 points with lockdowns and masks, the damage, collateral and otherwise, and the fact they don't work, it was the children and the pregnant women. And a lot of my beef with the GMC and what led to my career ending was I called people out, and I'm guilty of that. I've called out people, ironically, who spread misinformation. Sweet irony. So I was being accused of spreading misinformation, and actually I was looking at doctors on the television saying things such as, there is no such thing as a vaccine injury. The vaccine is 100% safe long-term in pregnancy. So I'd call these doctors out publicly and ask for their data. And that ended up with the GMC saying, well, these doctors are just following NHS guidelines. Dr. Cartland's attacking them. And this is her harassment campaign that he's started against these doctors. And so suddenly, from having an exemplary academic and medical career, I'm faced with what turned out to be 264 GMC complaints on the background of none in the past. I never even had a local complaint in my surgery from a patient ever. None of it was to do with patients. It's to do with internet spats. And like I said, I've always admitted to calling out misinformation, liars, and I've called out bullies. That's the two things I'll do publicly, loudly and proudly, and I'll never change, because if you bully me, I will name and shame you. If you lie to vulnerable patient groups such as pregnant women and children, I will call you out. And so those callings out were spun very cleverly by the GMC into Dr. Cartland is harassing these doctors who are merely following the government advice on the vaccine. And so that stacked up. And of the 264 complaints, they went forward with 5. So that tells you about the evidential merit of these complaints. There wasn't any. They chucked out 259 and they took 5 forward. And it's interesting, the 5 that they took forward were harassment, 4 cases of harassment. Now, harassment's a crime last time I checked. I've not been arrested for harassment. I've not been charged with harassment. I've not been found guilty by a judge or jury of harassment, yet the GMC found me guilty of harassment. And what the GMC very cleverly did is they looked at one side of the debate. So, if you've probably been involved in Twitter spats. I've been involved in Twitter spats. It's bi-directional. And what I found from my time with the police, and we'll come probably to that later, is that if it's bi-directional, it's not harassment. If you get involved, it's he said, she said, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. There is no merit for somebody accusing the other party of harassment. But what they did was they said, well, David Cartland said this to that doctor. And my hand goes up and said, yeah, but he said this before. He goaded me. He baited me. He's been harassing me with hundreds of tweets. And I called him this, but you need to know the context. And they said, we don't care about the context. We don't care. Whatever he said, you're the doctor. You're in the tribunal. It's not them. And so they basically did that to 4 doctors that I'd called out for spreading misinformation. And then the worst one that's led to the consequences, and we'll come to that, is that I was found guilty of creating vaccine exemption certificates. Now, if you came to me and asked me for a vaccine exemption certificate, I couldn't give you one because it doesn't exist. The document doesn't exist. So if you read any of my tribunal paperwork, it said Dr. Cartland created vaccine exemption certificates. Second charge, I was found guilty of falsifying medical notes. Now, falsifying medical notes is a serious accusation. That means I've tiptoed into somebody's office, hacked into the computer system and changed somebody's medical notes. There was no evidence of that. So I've created a document that doesn't exist, and I've falsified medical notes, and yet here I am, unarrested. It's a criminal offence, imprisonable. And actually the interesting point about the GMC for that accusation was they didn't even have a copy of a letter. So I put my hands up. I said, look, to the GMC, I said, look, I wrote 5 letters, extenuating circumstances. I used one example of a pregnant woman who had given birth in New York City. Her baby was sick because the cord was wrapped around the baby's neck. So it was an unexpected delivery, 30 weeks gestation. She was ill, the baby was ill, and the grandmother approached me and said, I need to get to New York City. My daughter's dying. My firstborn granddaughter's dying. I need to be there. They're in NICU and they're in intensive care for postpartum hemorrhage. And I wrote a letter. And it wasn't exempting them. It was saying, I stand with this woman for her right to say no to a medical intervention she simply doesn't want. And these are ethical principles that, that doctors have lived by these rules for a long time. It's a career built around medical ethics. So the ethics are bodily autonomy. If you don't want something, we're not in the business of pinning people down and making them swallow tablets. That's assault and battery. And the second one is valid refusal of consent with capacity. And that's what I documented. I put it in writing. I stand by Mrs. Jones for her right to exercise her bodily autonomy, and she's got a right to refuse. And that's it. And it got spun completely. Now remember, the GMC had no copy of the letter. They had no date of the letter. They didn't know the wording that I'd used. And the only reason they knew that I did them is my own admission. And even then, they said I was dishonest by producing these letters. Now, none of it marries up to the truth. And this has led to further consequences, as we'll come on to, because it wasn't just a strike-off. And you've got to remember, the medical regulator is there to maintain the trust in the profession, irony of all ironies. And when they struck me off, firstly, I didn't expect it. I did not expect it. I expected a slap on the wrist. I expected some remedial training, some social media coaching. You've got to remember this, the GMC have never released, until after my charges came in, any guidance or training on social media for doctors. It came in 2024, the back end. So they're holding me against regulatory guidance that hasn't been produced. No training has been given. No one's had any training in social media. It's a complete cesspit, as we all know. And yet they're holding these things against me to the point where I was struck off. And they said in the closing remarks, it wasn't just suspending. This was, erasure. And it wasn't just erasure in a month. It was immediate. You need to be stopping him from. I was 2 days before I was working as a doctor. 2 days before, there were no restrictions on me over the 3.5-year period that they investigated me. So evidently, they weren't that concerned about me. I was free to practice. I worked in multiple arenas up until virtually the day of my strike-off. And then they said, I brought the profession into disrepute. I negatively affected public confidence in the profession. And I was a danger to the public. There was no public involved. It was Twitter spats. There was no patient involvement. There was no clinical negligence. And then I'm watching as the GMC are letting off doctors who are raping. I saw a doctor 2 weeks ago who's had a sexual relationship with a 13-year-old cancer patient. He got a year's suspension. You've got another doctor castrating women, doing inappropriate castration of ovaries during unrelated gynecological procedures. He gets let off. There's another doctor who nipped out during the anaesthesia and had sex in his break while the patient's on the table. He gets let off. And I'm there having written 5 letters that no one's ever seen. These are real examples. I've got a whole file of them. So my argument's always been proportionality. Why am I so dangerous to the point where I need to be banned from working as a doctor? Whereas these doctors, the BBC reported on the rape, and they said the doctor was not struck off because it was a one-off incident. So according to the GMC, one-off rapes are okay. And we've got a massive problem with sex offenders in medicine. There's a whole load of sex offenders working as doctors. And meanwhile, Dave Cartland's unemployed and unemployable for writing 5 letters that no one's ever seen sight of and having internet rows with idiots. And here we are at the end of the career. I can't practice medicine now.
So what I'm getting, David, is it's a term that you use, the kill chain, which is, I think, a very good way of describing it. It's a series of attacks on you, not because you actually are doing anything wrong, but because they don't like what you're saying.
Yeah, kill chain sums it up, doesn't it? Really, it's weaponless, it's covert, it's multifaceted. It's not just been the career, as we'll come on to discuss. It's been every element of my life. Anything I've expressed enjoyment in, anything I'm interested in, they've gone for it. From refereeing, football coaching, playing football. We'll talk about DBS, I'm sure, the Criminal Records Bureau list that I've been put upon. And you know yourself. You've been on Twitter. There's this troll network, and it's very sinister because these people are not I don't think they'll ever be fulfilled. Their dopamine hits from abusing and harassing me, it's too much for them to leave it. So they've got me struck off. They've got me their DBS listed. They've got me out of football, and yet they still come for more. The latest now is arrests. They're trying to get me arrested. So they're piling into the police station, reporting Dr. Cartland is harassing us. And I'm going and sitting through interviews as the harasser, and I'm being interviewed about harassers who've harassed me, reporting me for harassment. Get your head around that. It's just bonkers and absolutely bonkers. That and some of the things that the police are showing me as evidence of my harassment are pitiful. They're laughable. So I think one of the police officers offered me an image of me talking about my tribunal. One of the things my tribunal did was they banned my witnesses from speaking. So can you imagine that you're fighting for your career? You're going into a tribunal, 6-week hearing for the charges that I've mentioned, and you've got a couple of things in your favour. You've got your witnesses and you've got your rebuttal. And they never allowed any of my 6 witnesses to speak, not one of them. They said your witnesses are inadmissible and irrelevant. Now, each of the witnesses was selected on purpose for the fact that they all had testimony to share, that it was the other way around. It wasn't me. It wasn't me perpetrating. Dave Cartland was the victim. We've seen these doctors attack Dave Cartland. It's the other way around, and he has unwisely, responded to baiting and goading. And I'll put my hand up to that. I have unwisely responded, unprofessionally at times. But come on, is it really? When you compare it to those cases I've just mentioned, is it really a strikeout? And then they went for my witness statement. They said you're not allowed to use your witness statement. You're not allowed to use 80% of your own rebuttal. So you're fighting your career.
Wait. How can they accuse you of unprofessionalism, right? When they are the ones trying to inject people with a toxin. That is the epitome of unprofessionalism.
Well, it's the irony of the fact that I'm now on a safeguarding list banning me from working with children and vulnerable adults for safeguarding vulnerable adults and children. It's quite ironic. And I said this to them, in one of the cases, one of the appeals that I did. I said, look, ultimately you're holding me to account for writing letters, not only that you haven't seen, but for exempting people, as you put it. It was never exempting. It was me supporting their right to say no. But I'm exempting people from taking a bioweapon that's harmful beyond all reasonable doubt. So where's the safeguarding risk here? And that's obviously now sort of spewed over into other sanctions. So they didn't just leave it at the we'll take your career off you. And I keep asking myself, I got asked in an interview yesterday, why you? Why are they coming after you? Why won't they leave you alone? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know why David Cartland's so important that he can't just be left to live the rest of his life. The current thing, as I mentioned, is the police reporting. They're coordinating openly, publicly on X. We're going to get him arrested, file complaints about him. In subsequent SARs, I found out the FA were receiving, the Football Association were receiving 20 complaints a week about me. The GMC, 264 we mentioned, the police are getting endless reports about me, and none of them are being actioned. And my point here is that if you're getting all these hundreds of reports about me, they're obviously nefarious, they're obviously vexatious, malicious reports, they're quite clearly coordinated. When are the police and the FA going to get their head out the sand and start comparing notes and say, look, we're noticing this guy is getting hundreds of reports about him and we're not acting upon them, so they're obviously frivolous without evidential basis. So I'm still waiting for the police to help me. I get death threats from the police. I had a death threat 3 weeks ago. A guy looked into the camera, said he's going to kill me. Just looked into the camera. I sent it to the police 3 weeks ago. Never had a call since. Not had a call. I could be stabbed. So I mean, one of my trolls actually said he was going to puncture me. He's going to stand on my grave and urinate on it, and he's going to set fire to me and pour petrol on me. I sent it to Devon and Cornwall Police. Guess what? They closed the case. No further action. It's unlikely that this would happen. It's just internet threats. Well, meanwhile, I'm being interviewed for one of the examples they gave was I talked about the editor of a local paper, and I won't name names, but they handed me a document, said, did you write this? And essentially it said, proper journalism should give the right to reply. Had this editor given me the right to reply, they'd know I was not allowed my witnesses, and my witness statement was heavily redacted. And I put hashtag kangaroo court, hashtag hatchet job. And the copper handed me this screenshot and said, this is a death threat to the editor because I put hashtag hatchet job. You're issuing a death threat to the editor of the newspaper. I'm like, well, Have you not heard of the phrase hatchet job? I'm describing what happened in the tribunal. It's certainly not a direct death threat. And this is what they do. It's so we've all heard the phrase two-tier policing, haven't we? This is two-tier policing. They'll investigate what they want to investigate, and they'll ignore what they want to ignore.
And what is your crime? Effectively, you don't want people to be vaccinated with this ridiculous toxin. That's it.
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? Criminal. And that's it, literally. Something I've had myself. Like I say, I'm a vaccinated anti-vaxxer. It's not even a vaccine.
I love that too.
It's crazy that, I've lived through this. My views have changed. I mean, I was always against it. It wasn't like I took it freely. It was a gun to my head saying, take it or you're going to get sacked. That in and of itself is a huge, huge red flag. You can't take informed consent without giving information, and you certainly can't get informed consent if you've got a gun to a patient's head saying, if you do not take this jab, you will not be able to work. You will not be able to travel. You will not be able to see your relatives. You'll not be able to visit hospital. And all for something that doesn't work. It didn't even give a small amount of immunity. And when they were producing these vaccines en masse, they were basing it on variants. And I'm just going along with the hypothesis that this actually was a real thing. But it was based upon yesteryear's variant. So when you had your autumn booster, it was based upon the natural Wuhan variant. So it was years out of date. You cannot produce a vaccine for a coronavirus because they rapidly mutate. There's never been a coronavirus vaccine for that reason.
So, David, you studied in medical school. You went through the system. How did you change your views on vaccines, for example?
Well, I mean, I did 2 degrees, as you mentioned. The first degree looked at science. It was root cause, pathophysiology. Why do these things happen to the human body? The second degree was very different. It was very rote learning. It was sat in front of a lecture theatre being told, this is medicine, this is the human body, this is how it works, these are the diagnoses, this is how you treat, these are the drugs that you give. And if that drug doesn't work, you give that drug and that drug and that drug. If you get a side effect, you use that drug. So it's very much geared. And I often say, the degree is called medicine. So what does it empower you to do? Give out medicine. Surprise, surprise. And so, all through medical school, I look back in disgust, really. I was a practicing doctor for 17 years. And I look at some of the things I used to do now under time pressure. As a GP, you're seeing 40 patients a day. That's reduced a little bit recently to about 30 patients there. And you're doing gynecology. In the same session, you're doing gynecology, neurology, bad backs, sick notes, mental health, and you're changing your, every 10 minutes. And, you've got to get the patient out of the room at the end of the day, otherwise you're not going to go home. So you're doling out drugs. So if someone's a bit sad, a bit depressed, their cat died, you start thinking, well, what am I going to do here? I can send them for counselling. They might get seen in 6 years. Or you can give them a drug to sedate them, to help them sleep, to make them happier, to SSRIs. And so you'd end up giving drugs all the time. And I'm disgusted with the fact that I never, ever did the job I was trained to do, which was look at the root cause of an illness and fix it. Because what doctors do now is they give you a sticking plaster. You got a bad back, pain relief. Got a headache, pain relief. You're a bit sad, antidepressant. And what they don't look at is, why is that person sad? Why has that person got a bad back? Why are they getting headaches? And as a GP, you're taught, take a step back from the patient, look at the holistic side of what are the biopsychosocial factors in their presentation. And you couldn't be that doctor, because if you were, you would be, you wouldn't go home. You certainly wouldn't have a lunch break. But when did it change for me? Just lived experience. When I was sat in my one and only immunology lecture at medical school 1, now I did a whole year in immunology in my first degree, which is why my knowledge of the vaccine is a bit more superior than a doctor, because I've done one lecture at medical school, and the lecture pretty much goes the same as vaccines are safe, vaccines are effective, vaccines have saved millions and millions of lives from avoidable transmissible disease, jab, jab, jab the kids. And I remember the finger wagging at the front of the lecture theatre. If you say anything against vaccines, you will be Wakefielded. You will be I remember the phrase, literally wagging the finger, you'll be Wakefielded. They've since replaced that now with, you'll be Cartlanded. If you speak out, you will be Cartlanded. And that's what they've done with me. That's why they've had to make sure that this is a zero tolerance to me speaking out. Vaccines themselves, it comes down to what we don't know about them. So a very common question I get asked from people who consult me through my health coaching is, what do I do now? I've lived through the COVID era. I've lost trust in the profession. What do we do about these children's vaccines? Because I'm confused and I've lost trust in the profession. And it all comes down very simply to what's in the vaccine. So when you think about what a vaccine does, it really should just be a small amount of the benign capsid of a bacteria or nuclear capsid of a virus with saline and put in your arm. And that's something like meningococcal ACWY. I'm not against that because it's a little bit of the sugars from the ACWY variants of meningococcal with saline, no added extras. But when you look at what they give to children, not only are they giving so many jabs, they're giving a 6-in-1 and another one and another one. So 8 antigens in one sitting, repeating it a month later, repeating it again a month later. They're vaccinating for things like hepatitis B. Why are they vaccinating children with hepatitis B? It's absolutely insane. So it's the hitting the immune system hard with multiple antigens, and then it's the added extras. The big issue for me is when you look at the ingredients list, and I was never invited to, asked to, looked at the ingredients list of a vaccine. It's very much, what's the word I'm thinking of? Nurses do the vaccines now. So it's kind of like subcontracted out to nursing staff. So doctors actually don't get involved with vaccines now. So all of the vaccination of all the children at various stages of their life is nurse-led. So the doctors don't really know. And when you look at the ingredients list and you find out there's preservatives and adjuvants called aluminium hydroxide, polyethyl glycol, polysorbate. You see how the vaccines are developed in human embryos, aborted fetus cells, cell lines from aborted human embryonic kidney cells. And so even that, ethically speaking and practically speaking, raises questions. And the point is, and the very important point is, we simply do not know where those chemicals go. So if you ask your vaccinating nurse, could you tell me, and this is the scenario that I tell people that come to me. So go to your nurse, say, I'm absolutely happy to have my son or daughter vaccinated with this plethora of jabs, as long as you tell me the following. Where does the aluminium hydroxide go? What's the biodistribution of the aluminium hydroxide? Where does it go in the body? Secondly, does it have any carcinogenic potential? Does it cause cancer? Does it have any reproductive toxicity associated with it? Does it affect your fertility, in other words? And do you know the answer to that is they don't know. So imagine me coming up to you and say, I've got an injection here to give to your little son. He's come for his jabs today. It's got some aluminium hydroxide in it. I haven't got a clue if it causes cancer. Not a clue where it goes in the body. And I certainly don't know if it's going to affect his future fertility. Are you happy for me to proceed with the jab? You'd have to be insane, wouldn't you, to say yes at that point? And that's a fact. And so this has turned my world upside down. And then you look at other drugs. You look at SSRIs, you look at statins, you look at opiates, benzos, all the drugs that you're giving out frequently. And then you realise, looking back, you were just a pharma shill. You were just a pimp for Big Pharma, handing out their drugs like Smarties, and plastering over symptoms. You were a symptom manager, and you weren't able to manage the illness. Every single symptom has an origin, has a pathophysiology, and unless you address that, you're not going to win. You're not going to make the person better, which is what a doctor's job is. Sweet irony, And
that's actually a good point, David. What is the purpose of a doctor?
Well, I've just said it, yeah. Make the person better. I mean, the headline should be, as a GP, there's different sorts of doctor, obviously. So it's to guide somebody from ill health, disease, to good health. And that is a multifaceted approach. Doctors are very focused on a drug. So if you've got symptom A and B, you need drug to make symptoms go away. Whereas I was taught as a doctor, when a person comes in for their 10-minute appointment, you're supposed to ask an open question at the start. So you say, hi, Mrs. Jones, how can I help you today? And then you give them the floor for a minute or two. Then your job is to ask closed questions to work out what of the differential diagnosis is most likely. Is that headache a brain tumour? So you ask, do you have blurred vision? Do you have memory issues? Do you have weakness, etc., etc.? And then you have to this is all in 10 minutes, you then have to address it from the patient's biological perspective. So the pain hurts. How does that affect you? Psychologically, how does that affect you? Socially, how does it affect you? Does it affect work? Does it affect childcare, etc.? And then Another step, this is another thing doctors have to do, all in 10 minutes, is you have to then consider what the patient's ideas, concerns, and expectations are from that consult. So you may come in, it might have a completely normal tension headache, but they've Googled it and they've realised that they could have a brain tumour. Now, unless the doctor does the right, you've got to reassure the patient that the tumour, it's not a likely diagnosis based upon your history, your examination. But if the patient walks out the room and you haven't addressed their ideas that it was a brain tumour and reassured them otherwise, then you haven't done your job. And they'll just keep coming back. So it's false economy. They just keep coming back to a different doctor. All of this in 10 minutes. And so doctors are kind of like, they find it difficult. I found it difficult in 10 minutes. And I always got told I was a moaner because I asked for more time with my patients to do all of those things, as well as obviously writing notes up at the end, write the notes up in a way that if in 10 years' time you get sued, it's medical legally contemporaneous. And all in 10 minutes. So, yeah, to answer your question, what does the doctor do? It should heal. They should heal the patient in front of them. Not just the disease itself, but the context of the disease in their life.
Well, I asked that question because you're right. Today, everything is about getting everything done in 10, 15 minutes. A century ago, doctors would go to people's houses. They grew up with the family and spent years with the family. They knew the people that they worked with. Today, it's just a business transaction.
Very much. And it goes right back to why I became a doctor. So when you do your foundation years, you think, well, am I going to be a surgeon? Am I going to be an orthopedic doctor? I'm glad I never chose that, by the way. And then, I chose to be a generalist because I kind of wanted to know a bit about everything. And part of the sort of fascination with it was thinking back to the doctor when I was a kid. That doctor you just mentioned, the doctor that knew the family, knew the context, knew everything about the patient. And, it's almost like a lottery when if you see the same doctor twice now. But following a patient up. So when you see a patient and have a number one encounter with them, it'd be quite nice to see how they got on. Whatever intervention you did, it'd be nice to follow them up. It doesn't happen in real life. So the actual stark reality of being a general practitioner is you get 40 random people come and see you day in, day out, and you haven't got a bloody clue how they ended up. So you don't know if your intervention works or not. So it's way, way removed from what it was back in the day when the family doctor, that's why they were called family physicians, they knew the family. They knew the grand, they knew the auntie. So-and-so was ill, they knew to call, which neighbour to call to help fill in. And it's so far removed now it's a conveyor belt. A conveyor belt of box ticking, drugs, get the patient out. You're just focusing on getting the patient out of the room. Else you don't get a lunch break. And in your lunch break anyway, you're out off doing home visits. So you don't get a break anyway. So I'm so glad. I keep saying about the strike off. It was a blessing because, my whole career was unhappy in terms of the stress levels, not feeling like I'd ever achieved anything with patients, realizing very quickly into my career that I was just a drug pusher. And it takes a lot to look back and say that. But now with my health coaching, I get an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours with the patient, client, call them what you wish. And I get to hear the full context of their problems. And in doing so, you hear, you get to fix them and you feel like you've achieved something at the end of the 2 hour session. And that's something I never achieved as a doctor. Just, at the end of the day, you go home and reset for the next day, the next conveyor belt. So I'm really pleased. I mean, the plan was always to get through the tribunal, win, because there was no reason to strike me off, and then to mic drop and say, stick your medical license where the sun doesn't shine. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way, and they erased me and called me dangerous. Dangerous.
Well, dangerous individuals like you are my favorite kind of individuals.
Yeah, I still don't know how I'm dangerous. I don't know. I look at some of the headlines. So obviously after the strike-off happened, the media got involved. And so, my face was plastered across mainstream media, local media, the local newspaper, double-page spreads, reckless, dangerous, bully, internet pest, to name but a few. Oh, dear. It's so ironic that I'm an internet pest while being abused online day in, day out. Not seriously abused, but there we go.
You've got a background in football, and you mentioned you wanted to say something about football.
Yeah, so the collateral damage, so to sort of cut a long story short, the GMC, once they strike you off for certain things, and bearing in mind I mentioned a whole list of doctors that haven't been struck off and continue to practice, what they have to do is they have to inform what was called the Criminal Records Bureau. So the Criminal Records Bureau is what it says on the tin. It's a check. So if you're employing David Cartland in the future at a pub, for example, you need to check that Dave Cartland isn't a criminal. So you run his name through a check, and the Criminal Records Bureau will flag up if Dave Cartland's a criminal, as in found guilty of a crime, convicted, and found guilty by a judge and jury. That was slightly rehashed. It became the Criminal DBS, Disclosure Barring Service, something to do with Ian Huntley and his job as a caretaker whilst murdering people. Long story short, it was morphed into criminals, but also people who've harmed demonstrably vulnerable adults and children. So the only way you end up on that list, criminal, or harmed a child, or harmed a vulnerable adult. So I get a letter on Halloween called a minded to bar letter, saying, Dr. Cartland, we've been passed on your case from the GMC. You were found guilty of harassment, and you were found guilty of falsifying medical notes, flouting international policy and rules at the time of a worldwide pandemic. That's the wording of the letter. We're now going to consider whether we should bar you from working with children and vulnerable adults for the rest of your life. So bearing in mind, I've just been struck off. I've lost my career of 17 years, 10 years training, all I've ever wanted to be, all I know how to be. And then you get this letter drop through on Halloween. And the reason I tell that is because it becomes directly relevant to the football. So the DBS, they give you a chance to appeal. I'll put in 10 references. I'll put in a sterling skeletal argument to say, look, I haven't committed a crime. I'm not a safeguarding risk. There's no children involved. So why are you considering this? 8 weeks later, they completely ignored all submissions and put me on the barred list, saying we think that you are a risk to children and vulnerable adults. We're banning you from working with vulnerable adults and kids for the rest of your life. Some sanction. And the reason they said it, and I have to read this out very carefully, and I'll sometimes read it live on air because people don't believe it. Because if you're being put on a barred list for children, people quite understandably think that you've harmed a child or done something to a child. And so anyway, so the reason they gave was, Dr. Cartland, you were found to flout international policy and break rules during a pandemic period, allowing your own ideas and opinions to overrule said international policy. If in the future you were faced with a child safeguarding policy that you do not agree with, you may allow your own ideas and opinions to overrule said policy, in which case that would present a risk to a child. So we're going to ban you from working with children forever. So this whole notional risk of something that's never happened currently, in the past, in my professional career, personal life, refereeing career, they're holding me to account for something I've not done. You broke a rule there, so you might break a rule in the future. Every human's broke a rule. And the irony is my job as a referee, as we'll come on to now, is to keep the rule on the pitch. There's 22 blokes breaking rules all through a match. My job is to keep them, from kicking each other and keeping to the laws of the game. Sweet irony. So yeah, I was a football manager. I was looking into my coaching badges. I am a football man through and through. I live, breathe, love it, absolutely. And, I know people say bread and circuses and all that stuff, but it's just something that distracts me from the stress of life. And so took up my knees gave up a year and a half ago. Couldn't play anymore. 43, I retired. And I thought, how am I going to stay involved with football? And I became a referee. And it's interesting because when you go to the refs course, they say, do you want to do kids football or not? If you don't want to do kids football, you just go and have a coffee. If you do kids football, you have to fill in a DBS form, criminal record check, to check that you're not a wrong gun. And so the point of the matter is that you don't need a DBS check to be a footballer, to referee open age football, which is men's over 18. Now, there are occasionally younger players step up to open age football, and veterans and super veterans, which by definition is 35-year-olds, 50-year-olds. So you've got older blokes on the pitch. Merrily enjoying my refereeing career, got promoted, enjoying my time. I've refereed 64 matches this season up until mid-February. I told the FA that I was on the DBS hit list and this may or may not happen. They really did support me. They didn't think it was possible. You haven't committed a crime, Dave, so it's unlikely they're going to put you on this list. Sadly, they did. And that decision filtered its way through to Devon and Cornwall's FA. And on the very same day of receiving it, they wrote a letter to me suspending me from all of football for 6 months. So they gave me an interim suspension for 6 months. Now, they listed what I can and can't do under that suspension. And they said things like, you can't referee any football. You can't volunteer in football, even running the line. You're not allowed to play football. Now, I just signed up to a mental health football team for my own mental health to get out there to mix with blokes and to play football on a Wednesday. Very relaxed football team. And I remember the day before I was about to play. I was playing on the Wednesday and I got the call on the Tuesday saying you can't play. They also said I'm not allowed to take my son's friends to football training. So parents who give me their trust and know me allow me to take their children to football training on a Thursday evening. We do it on a rota basis. FA said you're not allowed to take other people's children to training. They said you're not allowed to do online modules, keeping up to date with the laws of the game. None of this is linked in any way to the barring. The barring is very specific. I'm barred from unsupervised, regulated activity. So that means if I was to take a session of coaching of young kids on my own, I'm barred from that as it stands. And we're looking at overturning this again at the expense of a High Court judicial review. And so that banning me from things that I'm not barred from, what's that about? If a parent trusts me to take their kid to football, then that's got bugger all to do with the FA. I've just been banned from going to the conference. There's a conference every year in Cornwall. All the refs get together. It's really good for just sharing war stories and, issues and getting up to date. There's some celebrity referee coming to speak to us, and I got told to stay away. And anyone who's asking any questions about my situation with Cornwall FA are being warned to stay away. Don't get involved here. This goes up. This goes high. Don't get involved. Don't ask questions about Dave Cartland's situation. They're being warned, friendly warnings at the moment. And so, I am banned from football. And it was only this week, just gone, I got to appeal the suspension, which ends on the 9th of August. So I'm still banned. I was looking forward to it. I got fit. I've lost a load of weight, ready for the new season, hoping that sanity will prevail. And I sat in the FA's hearing on Thursday just gone, should I say. And I faced off against 2 FA KCs, senior elite sports KCs. One was a High Court barrister and one was a magistrate's barrister, a Crown Court barrister. And they're involved in elite sports, Premier League football, Premiership rugby, top end. And they're coming into a case to discuss should Dave Cartland have his suspension lifted from refereeing the grassroots level football in the Cornwall pub leagues. And anyway, they brought in with them 2 safeguarding experts who are career social workers who have an expertise in child safeguarding, hoping at that point there's some sanity, given that there are no children involved. I keep getting emails from the FA from their child safeguarding team. I'm like, hang on, where do children come into this? And anyway, they sat, they listened, we asked the obvious questions. Why have you banned him from things that he's not barred from? You can't stop him from playing. Why can't he do veterans football? There aren't any under 18s there. And they listened and they seemed to be taking what I said. Plenty of nods from the people listening. They went out, convened, and came back after 10 minutes and upheld the suspension. I remained suspended from all of football. Now, one of the things we did in the hearing was read out footballers who've done time in prison. So there's a whole list of Premier League footballers, Championship footballers that have done a year, 2 years in prison for various crimes. They're not on the DBS list. They're not banned from football. They actively coach in and around men's and children's football. Yeah, I'm banned from all of football. And I've done no time. I've not been charged with a crime. I'm not a criminal. Yeah, I mean, this is so far overreaching now. And you know what? If I want to appeal what they're going to do is eventually ban me for the rest of my life. So not only lost my career, I'm on a criminal list despite no crime, a list that has people that have harmed children and vulnerable adults, despite me not doing that. I'm then banned from football, my lifeblood, for the rest of my life, for nothing to do with football. There's not a football-related incident in it. And I'm saying to them, well, what safeguarding risk where? What do you think I'm going to do on a football pitch? Now, you understand it if you're a paedophile or a criminal that's harmed children and abused children. You understand that. You understand the sanction. But the word children, child and minor wasn't used once in any of the tribunal. And at the end of the day, that was a medical tribunal to look at, is Dr. David Cartland fit to practice medicine? And they ruled against that. And they said, you're not fit to practice medicine. As wild and mad as that is, that's the ruling. It's got absolutely bugger all to do with football. And I took that away, and that was my distraction, that was my fitness, that was my mental health. As annoying as it was to be swore at by a bunch of 22 overweight footballers thinking they're Cristiano Ronaldo on a Saturday afternoon, it's still fun. I enjoyed it, and it was my distraction from all of this that's gone on. And I just can't get my head around it. I just don't know what to do next, because to appeal the lifelong ban, it's thousands and thousands of pounds. The GMC quoted 20 grand to appeal after I'd just been struck off. And if you lose, you pay GMC's costs. Secondly, you get a chance to judicial review. You get a 3-month window. They wanted 50 grand to open up a High Court judicial review. DBS has cost me 10 grand so far to get a solicitor and a barrister to overturn a decision that shouldn't have been made, a decision that somebody somewhere signed off and put my name amongst criminals. And then the FA, you're looking at, I've Googled it, it's somewhere between 50 to 100,000. And you don't defeat the FA. The FA don't lose. The FA make the rules. We've seen it with the World Cup. They make the rules up. So I'm never going to win that. But you need to be a millionaire to fight for justice.
Mm. Have you got kids?
Yeah, I've got 4 children, yeah. Family man, Christian worldview. Pretty nice guy, I'd say, although I say so myself. Pretty quiet life down in Cornwall. Love it, and things have had to change. Obviously, I've had to cut my cloth accordingly. But yeah, the kids kind of know what's going on. I'm just going to try and keep it away from them if they can. They know Daddy's not a doctor anymore. Family man. And they don't think about that when they take your six-figure salary away and put your name through the newspapers every other week. And the local paper, I think they put out 10 or 11 newspaper articles about me in 2 or 3 weeks. They wrote a hit piece about me being homophobic in the middle of Pride. And they put it out, double-page spread, inside the warped mind of Cornwall's own dodgy doctor, David Cartland, and his homophobia. So they went through, and I would suggest anyone looks that up, and they went through all of my Twitter, and they found things that they felt were homophobic. I'm not homophobic. I've got a position on the trans agenda that most people have, even gays and lesbians have the same views.
Well, yes, of course.
We want naked men dancing.
Wait. A man can't be a woman and a woman can't be a man. It's that simple.
Well, and it's funny because one of the first things I did when I became a referee, I got hauled in front of Cornwall FA because I tweeted these words. I said, I do not believe that trans women should compete in contact and combat sports with biological women. I got hauled into what this is transphobic. I just watched the boxer in the Olympics beat the hell out of a woman to the point where the coach had to throw the towel in the first round. And this bloke, as it turned out to be, knocking women out, and everyone's rejoicing because of it's all very inclusive. It was a man beating up a woman, which used to be something quite terrible. Naked men dancing and twerking around children used to be a safeguarding concern. Now it's not. If you post anything about it, and we've just seen it with Pride last week in London, there were naked men flashing their micro penises around children. And I'm speaking out about it, and I'm the problem. It's like if I walked outside now naked, there'd be a lot of laughter. But aside from that, it's a criminal offence. It's indecent exposure, except if you've got a rainbow flag. It's disgusting. That's the thing. It's not about sexuality anymore. And a lot of gay people agree with me on this, is that it's not about sexuality and visibility and equality, etc. No one would disagree with that. It's men in fetish wear, gimp suits, dressing up as dogs. That's a fetish, calling themselves furries. And now kids are becoming furries. We've got a whole generation of people thinking they're dogs. They're not even born in the wrong body now. They're born in the wrong species.
Yeah, but David, the thing that also bugs me a lot about this whole conversation is they say you're homophobic. Let's just say that is the case, or you're racist, or you're sexist, or whatever. Okay, so what? Are you not allowed to hold an opinion on something?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are protected, aren't they? Again, they ignore the certain protections, aren't there, on gender critical theory. There's a Christian worldview, so they have to be very careful. It's quite funny, though, because the FA, the week after they had me, they ratified the decision of the Supreme Court that biological sex is biological sex. There's two of them. And the Lawn Tennis Association and the England Cricket Board agreed on the same week as the FA that there are two sexes. So it's a kind of told you so moment, really, there. But yeah, like you say, wrong thing. What? So what? You've got an opinion on anything. It's an opinion. It's different if you go around and abuse people for their sexuality. That's wrong. But and I always say what happens in the bedroom stays in the bedroom. But it's the levels of indecency. I posted images, and one of the things GMC found me guilty of was that I had been hostile, in inverted commas, to the LGBTQ plus community. And I posted images where children were in the background of men with suits clad with sex toys, men feigning masturbation on a sex toy in public with children in the background, men with sex toys inserted into orifices in public with children in the background. And the GMC basically accumulated that evidence and said Cartland's hostile to the LGBTQ plus community. No, I'm calling out indecency in public in front of children, which used to be a safeguarding concern, but not in 2026. That's where we're at.
So where to now for you?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I wake up every day wondering. So, like I say, I'm fighting for justice. I'm trying to get the DBS overturned. That there's going to be. I mean, they take ages. It's been 6 months now that I've been banned. And when you go for jobs, even minimum wage jobs, driving jobs, quite fancied a driving job over Christmas. So I applied to Yodel and Amazon and all that. It'd be nice to tootle around Cornwall in my car, dropping off packages. No, they need enhanced DBS check. Then I go for scientific jobs, and they'll see my name and they'll say, "Oh, it's that crazy Dr. Cartland. We don't want to employ him in our lab, even though he's got 2 first-class honours degrees." So yeah, I'm just trying to navigate that. Really, I'd like to get my refereeing back. Hopefully, if there's some sanity in the world, they'll say, "Well, there is no risk here. At least let him do his veterans and super vets and play." I'll run a health coaching website now. So a couple of things I do there. Literally, it is what it says on the tin. I coach people to get back to health, whether that's dietary, nutritionally, whether it's supplements, whether it's an issue that they need some help and support with navigating the NHS. The second aspect of it is what I call health advocacy. So there's a lot of people who've lost trust in the profession now, and they come to me because they're either going into an appointment and they really want to know what to expect, what questions to ask, what should the outcomes be, or they've been in a consult and had bad cervix, and they'll come to me after and say, "Look, I had this ignorant doctor. I went in with this, that, and the other. He's completely ignored me, gaslit me, told me I'm mental. Am I?" And so I'll give my opinion. So it's a kind of health advocacy, and part of that is actually looking at people's healthcare that they've received and saying, were there any errors? Were there any mishaps here that should have been avoided, and help empower them to get good healthcare, which you shouldn't really have to do. But so that's going well. I'm doing interviews at the moment, me as the interviewee, but also I do interviews of people. So I just flash up my mug now. So it's called Breaking the Silence, The Conversations. So that's my YouTube channel and Substack. So I interview NHS whistleblowers. I interview vaccine injured. And it's been quite successful. So I'm just, and I'm hoping somebody somewhere just offers me a job. I'll do anything, I've asked I'll do some farming, I'll do some fishing, whatever. I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing and able, but I just need someone to take a chance on this evil doctor.
Would you go back to the medical profession?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, this is the thing. I was always going to walk away. That I've said from the very beginning, even during the tribunal. I couldn't work amongst these people. There were issues towards the end anyway. So I was working at a surgery where all 3 nurses had heart problems after the vaccine, myopericarditis or variations thereof. And they absolutely said, "We're not going to have any more vaccines." Absolutely not. And they'd all had 2 each. And they were vaccinating kids with the COVID vaccine. So the same people who are flat refusing to have it themselves were giving it to children and pregnant women. How can I work amongst these demons? And that's what they are the demons. Because if you're willing to jab something that you now know is harmful, I had doctors in the coffee room telling me, "We will not jab our children. We will not under our roof jab children." The next day, as I mentioned the jabatoire earlier, they'd send the staff down to vaccinate your children. How can I work amongst these people? I'd just get into so much trouble if I was back in the NHS, the National Harm Service, as I call it now. And every day I'm reading of another calamity in the NHS, another patient failure, another, death that could have been avoided, another mishap. I don't want to have the blood on my hands, really. And these people, they are seeing vaccine injury. That's the big one now. And these people don't go to the doctors anymore. They come to speak to me because the doctors don't listen. They took the trust of their doctor. They took the jab. They got sick. They go to the doctor and ask, what's going on in my body? And they get abandoned, gaslit, told they're mentally unwell, referred to psychiatry. This is every case almost that I see. They've got the same story. They've took the trust and they're spat in the face, the doctors. How do these doctors sleep at night? I couldn't sleep at night if I knew that I'd jab pregnant women and children with COVID genetic bioweapons. Simple as that. How can you work amongst them? And cowards.
Have you been injured by the vaccine?
I wouldn't class myself as vaccine injured. I had some symptoms that led to my interest in vaccine injury. I had the first jab and I was in bed for 3 days, violent headaches. Nothing more than that, just violent, like my head was being shook, like an electric bolt through my head. It was something quite surreal because I don't get headaches. And after that, nothing. After the second one, it was a little bit more of a slow burn. So I pride myself on my photographic memory, although I'm getting a bit older than I used to be, so it's not as sharp as it used to be. Quite a sharp brain. To deal with 40 patients every day, 5 days a week, you've got to be quite sharp. And what I'd noticed about 3 months after the second jab, I'd start to get mental fatigue, like inexplicable mental fatigue, brain fog, memory issues. And I was doing interviews like this and I would be asked a question and I couldn't process. And it happened on a live interview. Once I was doing, I can't remember who it was with now, but I couldn't get my words out. And it was really quite scary. I'd go to the shop for 3 items and I'd have to ring my wife and say, I've only gone for bread and milk and something else. And I'd forget what I'd gone for. So yeah, memory issues. And that's when I really got deep into detox. How do you detox this spike protein? What does the jab actually do? Because even when I took it, no one told me. They called it a vaccine. I didn't know that it was a mRNA-based gene injection that biodistributes across your entire body, and it doesn't turn off, unfortunately. We're seeing now people producing antibodies to the mRNA-induced spike protein that they had 5 years ago, producing antibodies in the thousands. So scary. Why would they be producing antibodies to something that was injected 4 or 5 years ago? But yeah, I reversed it quite quickly, luckily. And you've got to look at kind of what does a spike protein do in the body. It's a toxin. They're basically, in a nutshell, making your human cell make a non-human protein. And if no one can hypothesize that that's not going to cause biological carnage, that's what it does. It causes immune system damage. It causes blood clots, macro and microvascular blood clots. We've seen some of the funeral directors pulling out these big strings of white out people's blood vessels post-mortem. It causes autoimmunity. It causes inflammation. It causes cancer. It causes protein deposition, prion disease, call it what you wish. The proteins deposit in people's tissue. And there was that guy, wasn't it, Professor Arne Burkhardt, who was doing the post-mortems just before he got bumped off, I presume bumped off. Because he was doing post-mortems on people's brains, hearts and testicles of men that had dropped down dead suddenly and found that their hearts, brains and testicles were impregnated with plaques of spike protein that he'd stained brown with immunohistochemistry. And lo and behold, as he's doing this research, he's then drowned, tragically drowned. Would you believe it? Like many of the other whistleblowers. Scary stuff. And the problem is that if you don't look for it, you don't find it. So most of the doctors will just bond or refuse to accept it. We're baffled. We haven't got a clue what's causing this constellation of random symptoms, but we know one thing for certain, definitely not the vaccine. Why would they admit that? Why would they admit that it was the vaccine when they've been jabbing man, woman and child, even unborn children, because we know it crosses the placenta? I remember obstetricians, one of the obstetricians who was my victim, went public and said the vaccine was 100% safe long-term in pregnancy. How can you make such a statement? And I called this person out and I got called a bully. And I got called a spreader of misinformation. And all I did was ask this woman, where's your data? Because when I checked last, pregnant women were excluded from clinical trials. So where's your data of safety? Not only safety, 100% safety, long term, which hasn't happened yet. And I asked her to send me the data or I'll report her to the GMC. The GMC found me guilty of threatening retaliatory action towards a female. That's in the tribunal determination. I sent a polite email asking where your data is. I'll show you mine, you show me yours, as it were. Mental times, eh? Oh, that's all I've ever championed, evidence-based practice. That's what you said earlier, what do doctors do? That's another nuance. It's you've got to back what you do and what you say and what you diagnose with evidence. Else you're just making it up. And that's all I ever asked. I said, show me the evidence, because I've got a phone full of files and files and files of data from around the world, publications, peer-reviewed journals, all saying that their vaccines are bad for various different reasons. But there's thousands now. There's thousands of case reports, thousands of case series, thousands of prospective studies now looking and following people up. It's just bad on every level. It's bad, whether it's the heart or cancer or clots. And I saw this in real time. You can imagine sat in a Cornish practice and people coming into you saying, "Oh, doc, I had that jab yesterday, and I'm not well. I feel really sick." And they've been to see other doctors, and the doctors are telling them it's long COVID. No, it's not the vaccine that you had yesterday. It's long COVID from that infection you never knew you had because you never had symptoms. This was a real case where a woman had a stroke the day after the vaccine. And the stroke was due to asymptomatic long COVID. And he told me, well, you can't prove it's the vaccine, whilst telling her she's got long COVID. Well, where's your proof, pal? He's just making it up. This long COVID fits everything, doesn't it? Covers a multitude of sins.
Well, David, how can I follow your work?
Well, there's very few platforms now. Like I say, I've just been kicked off Twitter, lost 300,000 followers. I'm on YouTube. I type in Dave Cartland into YouTube. Instagram, that's kind of taken up the mantle from Twitter. That's growing quickly. Instagram, Facebook. Like I say, my Substack is breaking the silence to conversation. So looking at doing some more interviews after this week, concentrating on getting this out, really, this story, because I want some public outrage, to be honest. I want some publicity on it. Because you can't just cancel a person. That's what they've done here. But yeah, that's where you find me. It's just beware when you Google my name. Don't believe anything you read. It's not particularly a good thing to do. Google David Cartland.
All right. Well, David Cartland, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
No, and thanks for having me. It's been good to share the story, albeit it's a bit of a tearjerker.